As a fan of the Yakuza or Like a Dragon franchise for many years now, seeing its titular and iconic protagonist Kazuma Kiryu make his bittersweet and tragic exit from the series in Yakuza 6 was a moment that has since become etched into my memory because of how impactful it truly was. But at the same time, it left a sort of sour taste in my mouth as I felt that the character deserved a better ending than what he ended up with. Which is why when likeadragongaiden, The Man Who Erased His Name was announced, yes, very long title, I know, but when this game was announced, it opened up the opportunity for Kiryu to be put in a better situation than what he was at the end of Yakuza 6. While also bridging the gap between Yakuza 6 and his inevitable appearance within Yakuza 7 as well, while also showing how he ends up as a dual protagonist to Ichi in Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth. I went into Like a Dragon Gaiden with many reservations, but also many hopes for RGG Studio's ability to write a story that would put Kiryu in a better place while simultaneously not nullifying the impact of Yakuza 6's story, and I can say that Like a Dragon Gaiden did all of that. So without further ado, let's talk about it. So to put things in perspective, I'm not one of those people that's gonna tell you that this is a game that you can play pretty much without playing any of the prior Like a Dragon games, because this game pretty much implies you've played the entire Kiryu saga up to Yakuza 6, including Yakuza 7 as well. So just keep that in mind. This is a game that hinges on prior knowledge. Its entire purpose for existing is, of course, like I mentioned earlier, to bridge the gap between Yakuza 6 and Yakuza 8. I'll be splitting this video into two sections, non-spoilers and spoilers, with this first section only really covering mild spoilers regarding Like a Dragon Gaiden's story. With that being said, the year is 2019, 3 years after Kiryu made his decision to fake his death for the Daidoji political faction in order to protect his family. Since then, Kiryu has been taking on secret missions for the Daidoji faction as a secret agent under the codename Joryu, with them in turn providing finances to his Morning Glory orphanage. We see that Kiryu operates from a religious temple, acting as a front for the Daidoji faction, where he is kept track of by his manager Hanawa. After Hanawa assigns Kiryu a mission that goes wrong, a series of events transpire that lead to Kiryu's involvement in Yakuza 7, where he would end up as Watase's personal bodyguard during the dissolution of the Omi Alliance and the Tojo clan. Now off the rip, one of the things I really love about Gaiden's story without going into spoilers is the fact that it puts the ending of Yakuza 6 into perspective. This shows us what Kiryu was up to after he sort of disappeared off the face of the earth, and it really paints his promise to the Daidoji faction in a much more tragic light than it originally appeared. This isn't to say that it wasn't tragic at all, but it's even more tragic now that we have full context as to Kiryu's actions up to this point than before. It shows that Kiryu's glory days are behind him, and not because he's washed or out of his prime, but because he made a promise to the Daidoji faction to disappear off the face of the earth, and that he has to sort of submit his free will and agency by acting as a secret agent, doing missions that he really would not care to do otherwise in order to keep his family safe. And because Kiryu chose to die, he's forced to give up any and all of his worldly connections in order to live this life for himself. He's holed up in a religious temple, forced to watch as the world grows and changes from the sidelines as the mass populace begins to forget about him. Kiryu is unable to see and experience the world for himself, and he's unable to build any more real connections with other people, save for his manager Hanawa. At this point, Kiryu really doesn't have much claim to life outside of protecting his kids, and he doesn't really feel like there's a future for him anymore. This changes by the end of the story, but as a whole, Gaiden is a game about how much of Kiryu's free will is he willing to give up in order to live this life. How many of his morals will he compromise in order to protect his loved ones? It's a game that shows Kiryu not only at his most vulnerable, but also his most emotional by the end of it, which I'll talk more about in the spoiler section. Now that we've got that out the way, let's talk about the gameplay of Like a Dragon Gaiden, because the gameplay of this game is so good. Like every Yakuza game from Yakuza 6 onwards, Gaiden utilizes the Dragon engine for its gameplay, but this is easily the best that Kiryu has ever felt in the Dragon engine because this gameplay follows the same philosophy as Lost Judgment. And much like in Lost Judgment, you can seamlessly switch between the two styles that Kiryu has in Gaiden, being his Yakuza style and his agent style. Kiryu's Yakuza style is pretty self-explanatory. It's really just his Dragon Engine Dragon of Dojima style that he's had since Yakuza 6. Kiryu's Yakuza style is really good for creating launchers in order to launch enemies to create juggle combos like you're in Tekken or something. Kiryu's agent style is the new style that was added to Yakuza Gaiden, because due to Kiryu's status as a secret agent for the Daidoji faction, he's since chosen to learn some of their martial arts techniques. As opposed to Kiryu's Yakuza style, Kiryu's agent style makes a lot more use of precise multi-hit combos as opposed to his Yakuza style. And because Kiryu's a secret agent, he has access to a multitude of special gadgets. These gadgets include the Spider, which is a special wire that Kiryu can use to latch on to enemies and either use it to sort of launch them into combos or just kind of fling them around. He also has access to the Firefly, which is an explosive cigarette that he can use for crowd control, as well as a series of drones called the Hornet. He also has some jet boots called the Serpent, which make for some added mobility. Overall, Agent Style was a really welcome addition to Kiryu's kit because at the end of the day, it shows that even if Kiryu is like 50 years of age at this point, he still has some new tricks up his sleeve. Though at the same time, literally nothing in this universe feels better than Tiger dropping someone like. To this day, that is one of the greatest signature moves like ever. The last thing I want to talk about in terms of Gaiden's gameplay is of course the side content, which in my opinion is always one of the stronger elements of any Yakuza game. Gaiden is of course no exception to this, because while it brings back some of the quintessential side content such as karaoke for example, it also brings back pocket circuit racing, which hasn't been a thing since Kiwami 1, and is easily one of my favorite pieces of side content within any piece of Yakuza media. You also have the Cabaret Club being reintroduced, as well as the Coliseum, where you can not only do one-on-one fights, but also team fights with a group of people. And you can even customize how Kiryu looks and even have him walk the runway. The Coliseum in this game is amazing. And as someone who loves completing sub-stories within Yakuza, having one where Kaito and Higashi meet Kiryu, even if they don't know that it's him, is really cool, since I always appreciate when these two franchises both acknowledge each other, since they are of course in the same universe. Overall, RGG Studio did an amazing job in both the story and gameplay departments of this game, even if the game is rather short, because it's only really meant to be a tie-in game, and yet even as a tie-in game, there's still a considerable amount of stuff to do. Gaiden genuinely feels like a complete video game, which is ironic because it's only 5 chapters long. It goes to show you that RGG Studio values Kiryu's journey and what he's been through above everything else, and so they wanted to make a game that felt as complete as possible while simultaneously serving its role as a way to tie in both Yakuza 6, Yakuza 7, and Yakuza 8. At the beginning of the video, I mentioned that this is a game where we see Kiryu probably at his most vulnerable and at his most emotional, and now I'm going to explain why. If you couldn't tell, this is the spoiler section, so for those that do not want to be spoiled on certain plot elements regarding Like a Dragon Gaiden story, this is your time to click off the video. Okay? Are we good? I've given you enough time, I think. Alright? Okay. Now because Kiryu has given up everything in order to live this life as a Daidoji secret agent, this in turn means that he has thrown away his past, his life, his name, and everything he once knew in order to become loyal to the Daidoji faction. However, there are many times in this game where Kiryu is forced to confront his past, though he would rather not if given the chance. The moment that you're looking at on the screen right now is a moment where Kiryu is forced to play through several moments of his past that have essentially been glorified for the sake of audience entertainment. I mentioned that Kiryu has been forced to watch as the mass populace forgets about him, but those that haven't are those within the criminal underworld, which you can argue that Kiryu has impacted just as much as he has impacted anything else. This game makes a lot of reference to many of the past events of the prior Yakuza games, showing that for as much as Kiryu tries to erase his name and his past on the history books, his legacy is something that those in the know will never forget. And with regards to Kiryu's sense of vulnerability, there are many moments in the game that show that Kiryu would rather die than bend the knee and bend his morals to those that he does not agree with, and yet at the same time has no choice but to do so and surrender his free will and agency, because at the end of the day, his kids are at stake here, and more than anything, Kiryu would die for his kids. At this point in his life, Kiryu doesn't have much to look forward to anymore, and the only thing he really wants is to have his normal life back, though this is impossible for him to obtain. You can get a sense of regret for his decision that he made in Yakuza 6, and yet this was a decision he chose to make because at the end of the day, he knew that this decision was the best for all parties involved due to his legendary status and the way that he draws people towards him, both allies and enemies. It truly is a tragic fate for a character that really does deserve to be happy for all the traumas that he's been forced to endure. Outside of his obvious desire to have his normal life back, one of the desires that Kiryu does make mention of, but he sort of brushes off by the end of the conversation, is his desire to go to Hawaii. This is of course what ties Kiryu to Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, but the reason behind his desire to go to Hawaii is genuinely so touching, and it's because of his first love, Yumi. Yumi's involvement in this ties back to the ring that Kiryu got her all the way back in Yakuza 1, and Kiryu wants to place that ring in the church in Hawaii where Yumi said that she would love to get married. It's such a bittersweet desire from Kiryu because at the end of the day, he was never able to get his true feelings across, and by the time that he could, it was too late, and so him going to this church would feel like a moment of closure for him. Now Kiryu does in fact brush this desire off, but it comes back up later. Now, I can't talk about getting to the most emotional part of Like a Dragon Gaiden without talking about what comes before, which is of course Kiryu's involvement in the dissolution of the Omi and the Tojo clan, and the last stand made by the antagonist of Like a Dragon Gaiden, Shishido. As a man that's had to fight through many life or death battles to survive, as a man that's had to struggle through the gutter in order to reach the top, Shishido is a man that represents the past. He is a man that represents the 100-year delusions of a mafia syndicate that has built their reputation on strength and through fear. And by extension, he is what Kiryu needs to defeat in order to close the book on this chapter of his life as a person that has had to reject that past. Shishido's speech to the Omi Alliance remnants as a man with nothing left to lose was so bone-chilling as he described that strength and fear is what the Omi Alliance built their name and reputation off of, and how they used this to take what they wanted. But even more bone-chilling was Kiryu's speech about having to crush their dreams and their desires in their entirety because since strength and fear is what they have used to build their reputation, crushing them through absolute strength is the only way that they will be completely dissolved once and for all. And the final fight that Kiryu and Shishido have in the Omi Alliance headquarters is without question one of the greatest final bosses of the entire series. This is a battle that genuinely will determine the fate of the Yakuza going forward, as Shishido tells Kiryu that what has driven these Omi Alliance Yakuza to persist all these years, including himself, is the desire to reach the mountaintop after climbing from nothing. But for Kiryu, as a man who has experienced what it's like to be at the top of the Yakuza world, as a man who had to climb from nothing as an orphan in order to reach that view, even if it was only for a second, Kiryu knows that strength is not enough to make a person feel whole. And yet at the same time, Kiryu understands Shishido's desire for strength as someone who has gained satisfaction from fighting those that have stood at the apex of the Yakuza world with him. But as the Yakuza have stepped on the dreams of the innocent in order to prioritize their own, what right do they have to cling to those dreams when those dreams get stepped on themselves? And so the two face off, the lion versus the dragon. This fight has a lot of the same vibes as the final boss of Yakuza 5 for many reasons. Not just the fact that it feels a lot like a Battle for the Dream Part 2 in the theology aspect, but also the fact that Kiryu and Shishido end up fighting all throughout Omi Alliance HQ, which is just the best thing ever. I always appreciate when we move locations during boss fights, and this fight does exactly that. You can feel the weight of Kiryu and Shishido's resolve being put into every single punch they throw at each other. And this all culminates in them heading outside of Omi Alliance HQ, cueing into one of the greatest soundtracks ever composed by RGG Studio, Hakanaki Yume, or Fleeting Dream. This song, much like its namesake, really does represent the theology of this fight and what all Yakuza go through in order to reach the top, and Kiryu is no exception to this. It makes so much sense that this would be the final song that plays during what could be Kiryu's final solo game, as this is him putting the dreams of the Yakuza to rest. The dreams of those who trample over others have no place in this world anymore. Strength and fear are not how one should dictate the acclamation of their dreams. The Yakuza are a relic of a bygone age, and Kiryu, a man that's lived for over half a century, knows this better than anyone. He's tried before to keep this relic alive, and at the same time he knows when it's time to hang it up. And as Kiryu delivers his final punch to Shishido, he knows now that the Yakuza can truly rest for good. And for his actions, he is rewarded with the single most impactful thing he has ever received in his life. Something so impactful that it leads to a more emotional Kiryu than we have ever seen in times before. A video of his beloved children telling him that they miss him more than anything. There are so many layers to this scene, as this isn't just Kiryu's feelings and just his happiness of being able to interact with his kids, even if it's behind a screen overwhelming him. It's not just happiness, but also a sort of grief at the same time. For as good as Kiryu is at controlling his emotions, and as much as he tries to keep his stoic persona up at all times, this is one of those times where his feelings are too strong for him to control. Here we really see just how much his promise to the Daidoji has affected him, as it's created a sense of isolation and loneliness within him. Kiryu is only allowed to go out into the world when he has a mission to accomplish, and besides that, the rest of the time he's holed up in the Daidoji temple, with his only real options being to meditate all day. And as much as Kiryu tries to hide that this is affecting him, we see now that this really has been. It's a scene that sort of reminds us how susceptible Kiryu is to emotion, and that he's just as emotional as everybody else at times. But with this in mind, Kiryu is still able to get something out of this, because since his actions have been so beneficial to the Daidoji and he served them loyally for the past 3 years, the Daidoji faction give him an extended vacation, one with no time limit, all under an ID that Kiryu has used in the past. Simply put, Kiryu has a second chance at life now, because under a new persona, this now means that he's able to travel the world at large, see things he's never seen before, and build new connections with people. It's not only a moment that sets up for Yakuza 8, as the end of the game shows that Kiryu's in Hawaii fulfilling the promise he made to himself for Yumi, but it also puts him in a better place than where he was at the end of Yakuza 6, while not nullifying the ending of Yakuza 6 itself and its impact. While Kiryu's not allowed to see his kids or go back to Kamurocho, it's still an ending that gives Kiryu a second chance at life, and that's something I'm always going to be grateful for.